What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today is another edition of the Overthinking MTG podcast, my first of Kamigawa spoiler season. Now strap in, because we're going to be doing a lot of these, because there are some phenomenal cards from Kamigawa that I want to talk about, and I want to start in a place that you probably wouldn't have guessed. I know what you're thinking, like, we got Tamiyo, we got Jin, we got all the new reconfigure equipment, we even have freaking Voltron, not to mention the return of Kiki-Jiki, all of these incredible things happening with Kamigawa, but there's one specific card that I want to talk about because a lot of other content creators seem to be dismissing it out of hand, and maybe they're right, but I think there's something special to it, and I want to talk about it, and that card is none other than Storyweave. Make sure I'm pointing in the right direction here. So Storyweave is an instant for 2 into green at uncommon that says put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature you control. Okay, there's more, because that wouldn't be exciting on its own. You also have the option, so this is a modal choice, put 2 lore counters on target saga you control. The next time one or more enchantment creatures enter the battlefield under your control this turn, each enter with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it. So Storyweave has a lot of implications that I really enjoy, not the least of which is that they work alongside the sagas. It works with the sagas that are coming out in Kamigawa. Its second mode is really where that's where the good stuff is. That's where the money's at. And so being able to put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature at instant speed can result in you winning combat and can be exactly what you need in the moment. 3 mana is asking a lot for that. However, I want to point out that Inscription of Abundance is around, and that's one of the modes. And frankly, it's one that I find myself using a lot, like a lot more than I had anticipated. So putting 2+1/+1 counters on something for 3 mana at instant speed is actually not bad. But the real benefit that we're going to get here is when we add this to sagas that are coming from Kamigawa. Now, if we have one of these sagas down, where chapter 3 is flip it and it becomes an enchantment creature, then all of a sudden some great stuff starts happening. Like, let's, just as a case study, let's take a look at even a bad one. Because what happens if we combine this with, say, Befriend the Moths, which, if you're not familiar, Befriend the Moths, this is a bad common saga. Now, this is not, I'm not saying that this is a good card. I'm just saying, to show you how good Storyweave is, let's take a look at a bad card and see what Storyweave can do to it. So Befriend the Moths says, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains flying until end of turn. Okay, great. And guess what? That's its second chapter too. So this is a saga. Both chapters 1 and 2, just buff a creature and give it flying until end of turn. In a normal situation, those lore counters are only going to be applied during your turn, which means this is an offensive ability. We want to give flying to a potential attacker and give it a little bit of a buff, because that buff is not going to last when it comes time for it to be blocking, unless we can add lore counters at instant speed, which is what Storyweave gets to do. But wait, there's more. Chapter 3 of Befriending the Moths, exile the saga, then return to the battlefield transformed under your control. Now that is a very common third chapter for Kamigawa sagas specifically. So let's take a look at what else this does then. Whoop. It becomes an enchantment creature 2/4 Imperial Moth with flying. So, like I said, for 4 mana, this card is very, very bad. Not like very, very bad, but not good. It's very situational. All of its modes are situational, and you don't have that much room to really control when the benefits happen. You know, if you have like a 3/3 body on board or something like that, or a 4/4 body at this point, and you throw this down, give it a +1/+1 boost, you get in for some damage, okay, great. But let's say you don't. Let's say you don't have a good line of attack, even with the flying. All of a sudden, then, now all you have is this saga that's just sitting here. Your opponent attacks you. All of a sudden, you Storyweave, right? Just check it. And you give one of your creatures +1/+1 and give it flying until end of turn. So all of a sudden, a ground creature can all of a sudden become a flying blocker, which your opponent didn't see coming, because this is all at instant speed. And then Befriending the Moths flips, and because an enchantment creature is entering the battlefield, because the saga exiles itself and then comes back as a copy, or it comes back into play as its back face, the Imperial Moth is entering the battlefield. Now, a 2/4 flyer is not much to really write home about, especially if you spent 4 mana on it. However, a 4/6 flyer, which Storyweave would have this creature enter as at that point, is pretty impressive. So it turns a do-nothing 4 mana enchantment into a buff on one of your dudes and a 4/6 flying blocker. Is it amazing? Not necessarily, but could it result in a really cool blowout if the situation occurs? Absolutely. And that's the power that we have in Storyweave, ladies and gentlemen. So it's a cool card. And that right there is what happens when Storyweave gets applied to a bad saga. What happens if we apply it to a good saga and turn it into something, take a really cool saga and add some Storyweave to it? Just sprinkle a little bit of Storyweave on it. Let's see what happens. Well, the saga that I want to look at is the Kami War. This card is possibly going to be a dream. A dream of mine, anyway. And the Kami War Storyweave deck is for sure going to happen. I'm going to build it. I can't promise it's going to be good, but I'm going to try it, dang it. So Kami War, here's what happens. It is an... So Kami War is another one that we've seen previewed. It is a saga for 1 and Wooburg. So it costs 6 total mana, and we have all 5 colors represented. Chapter 1, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls. Right out the gate, that is fire. Love it. It's so good. Chapter 2, return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, then each opponent discards a card. Also great. And so here we have a situation where we stick the Kami War, Chapter 1, the first lore counter drops. Cool, it blows something up. Sweet. On our next turn, we can Storyweave it, bounce something else, and then immediately... and then Chapter 3 will trigger at this point. Exile the saga, return to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control, and it transforms into Okagachi Made Manifest, which is a 6/6 that is all colors, it's flying and trample, and when it attacks, defending player chooses a non-land card in your graveyard, return that card to your hand. Okagachi Made Manifest gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the mana value of that card. It draws you cards, gets bigger, it becomes just an incredible beat stick, and this is and with Storyweave, it comes into play as an 8/8 flying trampler. I love it. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Now, we're seeing a ton of great stuff coming out of Kamigawa. Do I truly believe the Storyweave is going to be one of the most busted cards out there? Absolutely not. Do I expect it to see standard play? No, not really. Do I expect to see some kind of saga deck out there, whether it's in Historic, whether it's in Alchemy, somewhere? I expect to see a saga deck that leverages Storyweave and other... that's actually another effect that we've seen a couple other cards do, where you can add lore counters to sagas as a way of accelerating their effects, which, given that the sagas from Kamigawa have the payoff of flipping and becoming creatures, that makes a lot of sense, and it's really cool, and it can help. You almost have this like quasi, not thing in the ice or smoldering egg, because almost, but there's more inevitability to it. You have this kind of embryonic state that this creature is in the saga, and once you hit Chapter 3, it becomes the creature. I love that. I think it's a really cool, a very cool design. It is a cool use of sagas that we hadn't seen before. It's also a wonderful way, just from a story perspective. I have to say, like, the Kami War specifically, I find especially compelling because the Kami War are the events of the original Kamigawa block. And so here we have a way for them to depict, sagas are tales of the past. That is how they've always been presented there. And that's why their artwork, this vertical artwork, is always depicting masterpieces that are showing the different events occur. In this case, we have what appears to be some kind of like ivory inlay of Okagachi, the Grand Dragon of Kamigawa, who interestingly enough did not actually appear in the original Kamigawa block, but was printed as in one of the Commander products, if I'm not mistaken. But he was referenced in the old cards, if I'm not mistaken. But so here we have this tale of the past, and that past happens to be one that we lived in the past as Magic fans. And I think that's an elegant solution to have a futuristic set and continue to show reverence and an homage to the history, the past world that we knew and loved, the Kamigawa that we came from. I think that was a brilliant move by the game designers. Just kudos for that. I absolutely love it. So in this video, I specifically wanted to talk about Storyweave, but in so doing, talked about the Kami War, befriending the Moths, and just in general, the saga mentality that they have on on Kamigawa, and I absolutely love it. If you enjoyed this video, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, please don't hesitate to give it a 5-star review in your local podcast app of choice. I would appreciate it very, very much. It helps people find the show. It means a lot. Thank you so much. I will catch you on the next one.